The title says it all: the humiliation of a cheating wife, how a lover's betrayal led to heartbreak. Caroline, a 39-year-old press officer and mother of one from South London, has been married to Steve, a 43-year-old radio producer, for 13 years. She had an affair with Nick, her sister's ex-boyfriend, who is also married. 2 weeks ago, Caroline and Nick had decided to tell their spouses that they were leaving their marriages to be together. But as Caroline recounts to Claire Campbell, Nick suddenly had a change of heart, and it all came crashing down. "Sorry Caroline, I care for you, but I just can't do it," Nick said, the look on his face revealing the truth before his words did. The evasiveness in his eyes made him seem like a stranger, not the man she'd been in love with. Sitting in that coffee shop, where they had arranged to meet, I stared at him in stunned disbelief. We had spent months planning our future together. For over 18 months, Nick and I had been having an affair, both married to other people. And now, just days before I was to tell my husband the truth, Nick was abandoning me. The pain of realizing that the man I loved wasn't going to leave his wife, as he had promised, felt like a physical blow. I felt betrayed, angry, and deeply insecure. "We promised each other, Nick. You can't do this to me," I pleaded, but he shook his head. "What you do is up to you, but I've made my decision. I couldn't live with myself if I hurt my wife like that. She doesn't deserve this." His voice was defensive but firm. I wanted to scream, "What about me?" But Nick turned away, refusing to meet my eyes. In desperation, I reached out and clung to his arm, but Nick pulled away. The couple sitting nearby started to stare. In that moment, I realized I was truly on my own. If I went through with telling my husband about the affair, I would be risking life as a single mother. Many might say I got what I deserved, but I felt bitterly hurt and disappointed. For over 18 months, ever since reconnecting with Nick at a press event, I had thought of little else but him. Even though we were both married, it had felt so right to be together. I never set out to destroy my marriage. I still cared deeply for my husband and believed I loved him until Nick came along. I'm not usually a risk-taker, especially when it comes to my family's happiness. But I fell for Nick hard, perhaps because he reminded me of my younger, freer self, or because he paid me the kind of attention Steve once did. Nick made me feel important, attractive, intelligent, and valued. Steve, on the other hand, has never been the suspicious type. My job involves a lot of socializing, so he never questioned where I was going or who I was with. Perhaps if he had shown some jealousy, it might have stopped me, but I'm not blaming my affair on my husband's behavior. As my relationship with Nick deepened in those first weeks, I knew I should stop seeing him, but I selfishly didn't. The pull between us was irresistible. Our first kiss happened spontaneously one rainy afternoon. For weeks later, our friendship turned into a full-blown affair. Meeting at a hotel to make love, I realized that our relationship wasn't just about sex for me, it was about passion and a genuine connection. After that, Nick and I met whenever we could, whether at a hotel or for drinks after work. I hated the dishonesty and was sometimes shocked by my own behavior. Staring at myself in the mirror while applying makeup, I wondered how I could be so deceitful. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but even though I felt guilty about my husband and even more so about my 9-year-old daughter, I couldn't deny how important Nick was to me. I thought that as long as no one found out, I could protect my family from being hurt. Nick and I agreed not to text each other except in emergencies and set up a separate email account to communicate. As the months went on, I fell deeper in love with him, terrified of making the wrong decision. I started to long to be Nick's wife. Like most adulterous couples, the question of whether we could ever be together permanently was always there. Nick and his wife don't have children, and I often imagined what kind of father he would be, not just to my daughter but to any children we might have together. As our affair continued into its second year, I became increasingly preoccupied, neglecting my work, my husband, and even my daughter. I remember one evening when I went to say goodnight to her and found her crying herself to sleep because I had been too stressed and distracted to help her with her math homework. That memory still haunts me. My family has already paid a high price for my affair, but even my daughter's distress didn't stop me. I was obsessed with Nick. Then, last October, my husband Steve started talking about wanting another baby. It felt like an ultimatum. I had to choose between my lover and my family. I was horrified at the idea of becoming pregnant with Steve's child, but Nick wasn't ready to leave his wife. He said it was a decision I had to make alone. I should have realized then that Nick wasn't someone I could rely on. But instead, I tried to buy time, telling Steve I needed to establish my career more securely before taking maternity leave. Steve seemed to accept this for a few weeks, but by Christmas, he was pressuring me again to become pregnant. Nick was encouraging me to seek legal advice and started making plans for our future together. We discussed finances, looked at websites for flats and houses, and talked about how we could manage if we both got divorced. I was thrilled, feeling like a teenager who had finally captured the man of her dreams. But thoughts of how my daughter would accept a stepfather or how Steve would react kept intruding on my wishful thinking. I told myself it was better to be honest than to live a lie for the rest of my marriage. Looking back, my behavior was incredibly childish and irresponsible. By the end of January, I had seen a solicitor and was trying to figure out how to tell Steve I was leaving him. I confided in a friend who warned me to make sure I knew what I was doing and to think carefully about how I would handle the breakup and custody arrangements for my daughter. Her words made me realize how traumatic our divorce would be for our daughter, but I was so confident in Nick's love that I convinced myself everything would work out. I started looking at dates in my diary for when to break the news to Steve. I felt morally disconnected from what I was doing, going through the motions of work and home life as if everything was normal. I even found myself contemplating which items of furniture and books I would take with me when I left. It's appalling, but it shows how detached I had become from my married life. Nick and I agreed that we would both tell our spouses on the same evening, February 24th. We knew there would be tears, anger, and recriminations, but we had no idea what would happen after that. Nick suggested he come with me to tell Steve, but I felt this was my responsibility alone. I dreaded the moment but was determined to go through with it. Nick said he would tell his wife at the same time, and then we could talk on the phone about what to do next. We also agreed that if Steve asked me to leave immediately, I would not do so without taking my daughter with me. As we discussed these arrangements, I felt more like a criminal than a woman in love. In the 2 weeks leading up to the planned date, I became increasingly tense at home. Valentine's Day was the worst, buying 2 cards, one for Steve and one for Nick, just to keep up appearances. I felt like a hypocrite as I selected my husband's card and felt incredibly guilty when he came home that evening with a bouquet of white roses for me. By the following weekend, I was a nervous wreck, misplacing my car keys while shopping and barely listening to what was being said to me. Steve noticed how stressed I was and asked if something was wrong. I said no, while inwardly longing for my confession to be over. I felt it would be easier to face Steve's anger than his loving concern, which only made me feel guiltier. Then, around 5 p.m. on Saturday, February 21st, I received a text from Nick saying he needed to speak to me urgently and asking if I could meet him. I was surprised he was willing to take the risk of seeing me, as we live over an hour apart, but I thought it was because he was feeling apprehensive. Steve had taken our daughter swimming, so I arranged to meet Nick at a coffee shop. I left a note for Steve saying I had gone out for half an hour, having no idea that when I returned, my life would be changed forever. I've never felt so alone as I did when Nick told me he wasn't going to leave his wife. A part of me realized that Nick was finally trying to do the right thing by his wife, but he was doing so at the cost of my happiness. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I stood up with tears streaming down my face and told him there was nothing more to say. I didn't even kiss him goodbye. Nick tried to follow me, begging me to talk more, but I knew it was pointless. I climbed into my car and drove home, feeling utterly spent. When I met my husband and daughter outside the house, I felt undeserving of their warm greeting. My daughter asked if I had been crying, and I had to say I was just feeling sentimental. I haven't spoken to Nick since then, and I don't want to. There's no way I would continue seeing him. I'm not sure if my future still lies with my husband or if I should tell him the truth and let him decide if he wants to stay married to me. I feel used, rejected, and full of remorse for what I've done. For now, I'm just taking things one day at a time, trying to heal my broken heart without causing more damage to my family. I wish I had never been so foolish as to have an affair. Wow, the husband doesn't even know. She got played by her affair partner, who isn't leaving his wife for her. This is a classic example of the consequences of infidelity. She's been married to this man for years, they have a child together, and he even wants another child with her. And yet, she cheats with a guy who only wanted a fling. Her husband deserves to know the truth, and so does the other man's wife. One part of this story that really struck me was when she said they made a plan. If Steve got upset and told her to leave, she would take her daughter with her. Look at what they can get away with. If Steve called the police or someone else, they would probably side with her, saying the child is safe with her mother. But if the situation were reversed, he would be accused of kidnapping. It's just not fair. Lying to your spouse for years, all while pretending everything is fine. It's sad and ridiculous. Is it worth it? Let me know what you think in the comments. Catch you in the next one.